So just to fly straight in then, I'll utilize what you've just said, might as well jump in on some of the stuff you've shared. So just from a human point of view, you as an individual, what's driven you? Like obviously not everyone goes as deep as you do into exploring the nature of humanity and society and the consequences of our behavior. What is it in you that, put so much attention on that and so much of your life into that? What drives you in that direction?
Well, I became interested in philosophy because I thought there were really interesting questions there, questions you could still argue about because, nobody could just say, well, look, look through this microscope and you'll see this and that's the answer. So I was interested in philosophy. I was always interested in having a good argument, in trying to sort out, trying to reason your way through problems. And initially when I went into philosophy, it was that kind of intellectual curiosity. It wasn't so much a matter of thinking about how I ought to live. But at the same time, I did want the philosophy that I was doing to have some connection with life. That is, I didn't want to just do questions like, how do I know that I'm really talking to you? How do I know that you're not a robot or a carefully manufactured computer image or something of that sort?
Yep.
So that's why I steered towards ethics and political philosophy as well. And once I got into that, then I started thinking, this is not just a theoretical enterprise. This is not just intellectual curiosity. This is relevant to how we ought to live. And if I don't start living in accordance with the conclusions that I'm reasoning my way to, then in a way I'm undercutting the worth of what I'm doing, undercutting the importance of what I'm doing.
Right. So from you, this is hard to rate, but how much would you feel this is an intellectual process for you versus a feeling process in terms of life, in terms of your conclusions and your behavior and how you feel other humans should behave? How much is it based on logic and observation, and how much is it just an intuitive feeling in you as a person?
It's really not an intuitive feeling in me. I don't go by intuitive feelings.
Right.
It's I'm not sure that I'd say logic and observation, but obviously, observation, evidence that you accumulate, and then applying your abilities to reason. It's logic in a sense. It's not the formal logic that you learn in textbooks, but it's the ability to reason about things. And yes, we all have intuitions and feelings and so on. And you might say, if I didn't have some empathy with others or compassion for them or concern for the well-being of either humans or animals, then I wouldn't be holding the views that I do. But it's at a fairly general level. It's at that fairly minimal level. And I certainly don't want to go by my kind of gut instinct. The fact that somebody may describe something to me and I feel, oh, yuck, that's not a reason for thinking that it's wrong. You only have to look through history and people have gone, oh, yuck, at a whole lot of things that we now don't think are wrong at all.
Sure, absolutely. So on that point then, if you can see how throughout history we've attempted to apply different levels of morality to various areas of life, but would you agree from an observational point of view, it doesn't seem to be changing the overall fabric of human behavior, like whether we, get onto women's rights or the rights of different races or whatever the case may be, gay rights in society, or even people that have been through massive oppression, like the Jewish people in the war. It doesn't seem to lead to any sort of spread out awareness that changes the nature of humanity and society. We appear to be recycling the same behavior in a different disguise, maybe with better theories and ideas or better laws that make us look like we're improving. But my observation is that psychologically we're slipping, and particularly in my field of work, I'm seeing anxiety, depression and suicide on the rise, and our ability to deal with it is lessening. And I feel like the status of psychological thought on the planet pretty much is indicative of the nature of where we're actually at, not what we tell ourselves or how good our systems of functioning are. It's more the reality of where we're at as a species, individually and collectively. So I'm just wondering how you observe that to be, and whether you're feeling like we're on a downhill track to nowhere, or do you actually feel like we're slowly but surely sorting out the human condition and learning how to function in a better way?
I'm going to have to disagree with you there. I think that we have been making progress steadily over centuries and millennia, even if you like.
Mm-hmm.
That there are, you can go back any more or less to any period, and there will be a lot more violence against other human beings. The chances of any individual living on the planet of dying violently at the hands of other human beings would be greater in any past period than they are today. And that's, despite the fact that, of course, this is not a steady uphill path. This has its ups and downs, including, you mentioned, the middle of the 20th century was a terrible period in that respect. But I think we have since then, clearly there have been fewer wars, fewer violent deaths in wars. There's also rates of murder have fallen pretty dramatically throughout the last couple of centuries. I also think that some of the issues you mentioned, actually, behaviour is significantly different, and you don't have to go back very far. The university that I teach at in the United States, at Princeton University, did not admit women until the 1970s, did not really have anything but token African Americans until well into the 20th century. That's all changed, and you couldn't run a university really now in the way that Princeton was run just, say, 100 years ago, in terms of being a white male preserve. I think in a lot of these respects, we are doing better. Maybe not every country in the world is doing better. There are some certainly that are lagging severely behind, but I think the general trend is definitely upwards.
So do you think that means we're growing as people, or do you think we're just putting better systems and laws in place to make us behave better?
Well, I think it's probably a bit of both. I think that having better systems and laws in place is really important, and having laws that get reasonably well enforced is important. And I think that's one of the reasons for the decline in violence, domestic violence within a nation. But I do think that has an effect on people. You change the law, look at racial integration in the American South, right? You go back, go back 75 years now, and most white people would not have wanted to sit next to an African American in a restaurant or on a bus. That didn't change because suddenly white people in the South said, oh, it's fine, there's nothing wrong with sitting next to African Americans. It changed because the court said you can't segregate restaurants and buses. But after the court said that, now those same Southerners or their children or grandchildren won't think twice about sitting next to an African American. So they've changed as well.
So, I see what you're saying, obviously. There's no debate there. I see those level of improvements. But then I also look at the overall outcome. And if we could perhaps slip in the way we treat animals into this discussion at this particular point, might be an interesting injection. Because why do you think it is then that we're learning how supposedly to treat each other better and with more respect, and to be more, perhaps a wider circle of understanding of different types of people and backgrounds and all that kind of thing? So I can see there is certainly a broadening out of acceptance in that sense. Why do you think it is when it comes to other species, we still seem to be justifying the treatment of them in a completely different framework of thought? We're not using all this wisdom in terms of how we should treat each other, meaning we've learnt that suffering is wrong and that bullying is wrong and that all those things are inappropriate to be putting upon anything weaker and more disadvantaged. So if we look at more as a general idea, we seem to be applying it in a very narrow way just towards our own species, as opposed to just looking at it as a way of being. Meaning if something is weaker and more disadvantaged than you, it deserves more respect, not less respect. And yet we seem to still be taking advantage of anything that has no say, if we can get away with it. It's almost like there's nobody watching over the top of us. So we're pretty much free to do what we like. So we only judge each other on human behavior, but we tend to, other than vegans or animal activists, tend to justify cruelty and abuse and murder to gain pleasure from it. Why do you think that is somehow still slotting in so conveniently, and that animals are killed in the billions every year, and most of the time in horrific conditions still? It's not, I'm obviously against killing full stop. I think it's a mindset that is corrupt in the human brain that needs addressing. But outside of that, why do you think we're still seeing this? Why is this such a heavy part of society in the face of what you're presenting in terms of our improvement?
I think this is a really big change that we're talking about here, to get away from treating animals as food, for killing them for food, is a really very, very big change. I mean, you said we're narrow in our sense of whom we are treating well and whom we have concern for.
Yes.
But in fact, as I was saying, I think we've made progress. And if you get to, let's say, the 1940s, the late 1940s, then you would say, well, look, people made great progress. They passed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that all human beings have rights. And compared to what was happening, obviously, earlier in the 30s and in Nazi Germany and so on, that was an important declaration. So having reached that stage, it's going to take some time to go to the next stage, which is to say, well, wait a minute, recognizing the rights of all members of our own species isn't enough. We've got to extend this to all sentient beings, to all beings who can feel pain. I think that's a really quite revolutionary change. There's virtually nothing in all of human history that where that has happened. I mean, there are occasional, Buddhist Emperor Ashoka or something in India who tried to ban slaughter of animals, but it's brief and and local and a long time ago. So this is a very fundamental change about something that's pretty central to our lives, what we eat, and it requires a massive mindset. So it's comparable to the movement to abolish slavery, but I think it actually goes even deeper, because pretty much everybody eats meat or animal products, and not everybody owns slaves. So if the anti-slavery movement took 100 years or something to more or less triumph, and hasn't completely triumphed but gets close there, then I think we'd have to expect this movement to take at least 100 years as well. Now, personally, I hope it comes quicker, but so far, really, it hasn't had that long. I think you can date the modern animal rights movement from the mid-1970s, so it's not even 50 years yet. I think it will take longer, but I do think that there are some signs that some positive things are happening.
Okay. So do you think it's reasonable to propose that the true nature of humanity could be witnessed not by how we behave when there are laws put upon us, but how we behave where there aren't laws? So when it comes to how we treat each other, there's been a lot of enforcement put in place to get us to be nice to each other as a human species. But when it comes to animals, there are very few laws. There are some, obviously, but very little. I mean, in the main, people can do what they like. They can leave their little dog in the backyard 24/7 and just chuck some food out, never pat it, leave it sleeping in the rain, and no one can really do anything about it. And I see this happening all the time, and that's just one obvious example through to how we treat the animals we eat, etc. I guess the point I'm getting at is there not more truth in our behaviour seen in how we treat animals? Because there's no one telling us what we can do. Isn't that? I feel like we need to look at the truth of what we are as a species, because obviously I think we're on the same journey as men on planet Earth, where we're looking to see a more conscious expression of human life with more awareness and more morality and learning how to communicate with each other rather than fighting with each other. My concern is that I don't feel that people are improving in the manner that you are observing, and I think the way they treat animals is an obvious example of that. Given the opportunity to be cruel, people will still be cruel. I don't see this shift from within, and I feel like it has to be an internal shift. It has to be the nature of how we function needs to change. And at the moment, it's all fear-based functioning, which means fear creates a very narrow conceptual world where we pick and choose what we care about. That's the nature of concept. But in a conscious space, we just see the truth of everything. So if something's cruel, it's cruel. So for me, the observation is we're still on a fear-based pathway, and fear-based pathways, to me, just get narrower and narrower. And so I'm observing something very different to you, where I feel like society is actually shrinking in its advancement as opposed to expanding. And I feel the way we treat animals is a perfect proof of just that. Whereas I know you're saying something very different. But if obviously there's only one truth to this, so I don't look at this as whose opinion is right. I guess I enjoy these discussions to see whether we can just nut out what is really going on this planet, and are we going to make it as a species? Because it looks like, this century is going to decide whether, we get there or not, short of a meteorite taking us out. But if it's left up to our own behavior, what are we really going to do here? Like, in your mind, what do we really need to do? Because I don't think we have 100 years to slowly work out how to treat animals nicer, or I don't think humanity's going to make it that far. I don't think the planet will last that long. Do you see any truth in what I'm saying, or do you feel like that we really are on track at the moment?
There's a lot of things that I'd say about what you said. One is that I think human nature is something. I mean, it has the possibilities of acting in quite horrible ways, and we do sometimes see that with animals. And we've certainly, if you study the behaviour of really perfectly ordinary Germans under Hitler and so on, they can behave absolutely appallingly. But then you can put on the other side stories of people who behave very altruistically, and societies which are generally, decent and caring societies where people care about others. So I think it does depend on the circumstances. I think we just have to accept that. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily fear-based. I think there's a variety of social pressures that act on people, and they respond in different ways. And you can certainly sometimes, you can have to change behaviour, sometimes by threats of punishment in some cases, but there's an awful lot of good things that people do that are not motivated by threats of punishment. So, and that, I would say, I think it depends on what the circumstances are that we're able to create in order to encourage more altruism, more compassionate behaviour, and so on. In terms of what you said about, we don't have 100 years to save the planet, unfortunately, I think the planet would continue however cruelly we treated animals. To me, there are other major threats to whether we as a species survive. Climate change is certainly one possible one. Use of nuclear weapons is still another, although maybe that threat's receded a little bit over the past couple of decades. But there are, bioterrorism people talk about, a whole variety of possible threats to our species, and I'm not sure whether we will or will not overcome them. But I agree with you that I think if we can survive another century or so, then probably our prospects will get better, because we are certainly making progress in science and technology that will give us the ability to cope with our basic needs more easily than we have been in the past, and that ought to make it possible for people to, I guess, be more accepting of the needs of others.
I mean, because the key to all this is obviously us as a species, to understand, because every problem we try and fix is created by us in the main, whether that be on a bigger global scale or even in our individual lives. I mean, more often than not, if people's lives are a mess, they've made it that way. And, if they work on themselves and understand themselves and step into a more truthful place, they can create a life that makes more sense and more true to them and more harmonious with their connection with whatever it is that they're interacting with. So whether it be, the guy across the road with his wife that can't really get on with his kids, or whether it's all of society destroying the planet and creating an environmental crisis, the end result is it's us. And what I don't see happening is enough discussions about human behavior. To me, that should be on the top of the list. So we can establish and discuss what's going on, and we can look at the ethics of it, and we can look at where we're at and the new laws that have come in and the new rights for this and that. But ultimately, why aren't we looking at why we've created, why is it like this in the first place? Because we've made it this way. And I think human behavior is the key. And I think we need to understand how the human mind works, how it creates its conceptual reality, which creates all of our behavior, and then therefore that creates the societies we live in. It's like Einstein proposed, you can't solve a problem using the same thinking that created it. And I completely agree. And I don't think that's what we're addressing. I think we're trying to solve all the stuff that you're looking at using the same thinking that created the problem. And my observation is that even though it looks like we're improving, we're actually making it more complex and creating more problems the more we find new solutions. And I get back to saying I think the observation that tells me that is also human behavior. And human beings are more insecure and more disturbed than they've ever been. And the more insecure a human becomes, the worse they behave.
I don't accept that statement. You may see some of the more disturbed ones, but I don't know any evidence that human beings are more disturbed than they have ever been.
So you don't think there's more fear on the planet in the way people are connecting and their fear of terrorism, their fear of this? They seem to be terrified of everything.
Yes, there clearly is fear of terrorism now, but then, there's no fear that bandits will come in the night, descend from the hills, sack your house, rape your wife, and go off with the spoils, which maybe people in villages in many parts of the world still fear, and certainly in previous centuries people feared that. And that's actually a lot more likely than that you are going to be a victim of a terrorist attack, which, after all, terrorism has killed, some thousands of people in the years since 9/11, maybe tens of thousands, but,
not many.
Nothing, very small numbers, really. Yeah. And of course, the media sort of, use that fear, and people are interested in it. But I wouldn't say that people are necessarily more fearful than they were in previous times.
Right. Okay. So, what's your vision then? Or, I mean, firstly, I guess, do you have a vision? Like, you're a man who has obviously been on the planet long enough to see it through different eras of your own life as well, and different ages. And I know as I get older, like you, it certainly affords a new look at everything, including yourself within it. What is your vision of humanity? What do you feel is going to happen? Like, in your eyes, do you see this improvement happening? Meaning, like, yeah, I think we're going to do it. We're like, is that just going to happen, or is it going to require people like you to intervene, or how is this going to happen if we do?
It requires people to work and to intervene and to try to make things better. But I think that's happening all the time. I think there are a lot of social movements that are trying to intervene. And just going back to what you said about understanding human behavior, there's a lot of science going on, people trying to understand human behavior, and in some cases connecting with some of those social movements to try to help them to understand how to change human behavior. So I think there are many people trying to do this. It's a very complex question. How do we change human behavior? And I guess we get some pieces of this puzzle. We learn a little bit more, but there are other things, and there are various kinds of situations that we don't fully understand how people behave. So yeah, it's complicated, but I think we are talking about that, and we're working at that. And I think it certainly will take good-hearted people to put a lot of effort into making the changes that are needed. And the people who are turning up at the vegan festival, I assume, are mostly people. I mean, some of them may be there for their own health, but many of them will be there because they do care about the planet and they do care about animals. And those people need to keep building their movement and growing.
All right. Well, can I put a proposition to you then? And I won't say whether it is truth or not truth. I'll just put it forward, and I'd like your opinion on it. My proposition is the human brain is not the issue. It's the nature of the energy that guides the brain. And I can see this, from my life observations, from within myself, or my work with other people.
I don't understand the statement, the energy that goes
into... To me, there's two energies that guide the human brain. The human brain, when it's guided by fear, creates a conceptual reality, and it creates the world that we see. And without fear, there is no concept. Fear creates a segregated reality where we break things up into bits and pieces, and we learn in a sequential way, and we learn one step after each step. Now, you grab the same brain, get fear out of it, and just let it function in a conscious state. It doesn't work that way. It just sees life for what it is. So the person is who they are, the world is what it is, and they engage naturally, openly, and honestly. And people in a pure conscious state behave with integrity. They don't need to be taught how to behave well. They just do.
I'm also not understanding the expression of a pure conscious state as if a state with fear in it is not a pure conscious state. I think it can be.
Okay.
You're presenting two options here, which to me are not really different. I mean, I think people have varying levels of fear at different moments. Sometimes fear may certainly take over completely and may produce all sorts of terrible consequences. at other times, people may have some fears. Somebody close to me gets cancer, I feel some fear that, maybe I will as well. But that doesn't mean that I'm not functioning as a fully conscious human being.
Okay. All right. I mean, obviously we see that quite differently. So how you're probably going to see this as a bit extreme as well. I'm proposing that if there was one topic we could all look at that would make the change. I mean, animal cruelty is a good one because it exposes so much about human behavior. But I think there's a more powerful topic, and I think it's one of the most avoided ones in human conversation, and that is individual insecurities. And every human being is walking around with them, and it's limiting their life, it's limiting their ability to act in the truth. And I believe it's human insecurities that's causing most of the problems on the planet. So we've got, so many billions of human beings all walking around in an insecure state, sharing insecurity, but making out that they're not, and hiding their deeper fears and what's really driving their life. So by the time we get to the outcome of their behavior, we're seeing a very edited, small version of it because they're not really giving up the truth of how they think and feel. And to me, if we could actually all get honest and share our fears and insecurities and get past that, I think we'd see the nature of communication and how we would share our intelligence would rise dramatically, and the way we would deal with this global crisis would rise dramatically, because the enormity of what we're facing is so much bigger than the tiny level of conversation we're currently having. And the conversation is currently small because everyone's not admitting their fears and insecurities. And to me, that's very obvious that that's what's going on.
Are you a follower of Alfred Adler?
No.
I see. Okay. It sounds a little bit, you're familiar with Adler's views about the inferiority complex, are you?
No, I'm not. No.
Okay. So it happens that my grandfather was a colleague of Adler's who lived in Vienna in the 1920s, and what you were saying sounds rather like Adler. But, basically my view about what you're saying is, as with my view about Freud as well, that people come up with this, this is the answer to everything. It's our repressed sexuality. It's our inferiority complex. It's our insecurities. I don't think that there is one answer like that. I think that it's more complicated. There are many things. Certainly, when people are insecure, they're likely to behave badly, and it's therefore a very good thing if we can increase their sense of security. But I don't think that that's the only thing. I think that there's a whole lot of different things.
Well, I'm not saying it's the only thing. No, I don't want to give the wrong impression there. What I'm pointing out is, if we keep trying to solve all these bigger issues through an insecure state, we keep distorting everything because no one's completely honest when they're insecure. And what I'm saying is, if we could work on that collectively and all help each other find a more confident space to exist in and look at that as a priority, then our ability to share and communicate would rise dramatically, and hence our ability to deal with all the issues that whether that be our marriage or a global crisis, it doesn't really matter. We're going to be able to deal with it in a stronger, clearer way, and hence utilize all of our ability.
How do we do that? This now reminds me a little bit about people who say, look, it's no use trying to get animals out of factory farms. The real problem is the economic system. As long as you have free enterprise and commercial profits, then people will exploit animals. So the solution is we need a communist revolution that does away with private property. Now maybe that would help, but I have no idea how you would achieve it. And maybe, of course, as historically has happened, it would actually not lead to the results you want at all. And with the case of saying, well, we have to deal with people's insecurities, I'm not sure how we do that. And I would be very reluctant to say, let's drop our efforts to get hens out of very small cages, for example, or get people to stop eating factory farm products and instead focus on their insecurities. Because, I don't know, it might be another 50 years before we understand how to get people to overcome their insecurities. And for that 50 years, these animals will continue to suffer. Whereas I see progress being made, at least in Western nations anyway, in terms of getting people to be more aware about animal suffering and getting them to boycott products that come from animals who suffer, and getting the industry to reform itself to some extent.
Sure. Look, and I'm not suggesting for 1 second we don't keep doing what we're doing, and all the people on the ground that are working hard to make life better for other humans and animals and needs to continue. We can't just No one, no, I'm not proposing that all of a sudden there's a magic answer. I'm proposing we're not talking about the right things, that the conversations we're having are off track, and that we're not homing in on where we need to head. So I'm not saying if we start talking about human insecurities, everything's going to be fine. I'm saying we're missing an essential piece of the puzzle in the overall conversation of life. And I'm proposing if that one's missed out, it's going to limit our ability to deal with everything else. And I think it can't be put to the side as if it's some insignificant thing. And it is pushed to the side because the last thing anyone wants to talk about is their insecurities. But I just think it's like such a silly thing to leave out of the equation. And in the main, it is. In the bigger picture of conversation, it is. Sure, there may be psychologists that work on it and devote their lives to it, and professors and whatever. But that's not getting into mainstream conversation yet. And I think it could be changed. And I think, but first we've got to acknowledge that this needs to happen. I don't think we're acknowledging what it is about us that's causing all the issues that you address. And I think this is one of the key issues. And to me, it's obvious that it is. It doesn't even need a debate from my point of view. It's like that is what it is. And I can see that whether I'm dealing with individuals in my work, when I help them function in a space which ultimately is removing themselves from their concepts of self and just being themselves, their behavior changes dramatically. People open up to veganism when I take them on those journeys. I don't even have to mention animal rights. They start seeing things in a different way. They start feeling life in a more honest way. They start behaving with more integrity. So I think it's a faster track way for changing everything than, the way that we're currently doing it by trying to change all the outer consequences of what we do. And I think that needs to continue in the meantime. But I think if we're going to avoid these topics, then I think we're just going to stuff it up, personally.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the confidence you do that this is lying behind the other things we're objecting to, and I also don't know how we would change it on a large scale. But have a try if you like. Try to get it into the.
I certainly will.
About it, and let's see if anything happens. Good luck.
Yeah. So with your life then, what have you got anything new in motion, or have you got anything that does it keep growing in terms of your head and in terms of what you need to put out there, or what conversations need to be had? Like, where would you say you're at the moment in your life?
So I'm at a stage where I think probably the major ideas that I've been working on over the last 40 to 50 years. I'm unlikely to change now. There will be some details. I've changed some of the views about my philosophical positions just in the last 3 or 4 years, but they're details. They're not the major things. So I would see what I'm likely to be doing as a stage of trying to defend the sorts of things that I'm saying against objections, but also being active in trying to get more people to act on these things, because I have achieved a certain prominence, and that gives me a bit of a megaphone to speak to people. So I think I can use that to help to spread what I see as desirable movements. Obviously, the movement to treat animals better, to get people to avoid products of cruelty is one of those important movements. Trying to stop climate change is another important movement. Global poverty is another issue that I've worked on for more than 40 years and that I see progress being made on. And, a lot of young people getting involved in movement known as effective altruism to try to be more effective in trying to help others and reduce poverty. So I see my role over the next few years as, to a significant extent, not exclusively, but to a significant extent, trying to support those movements and give them whatever support I can from the position that I've achieved.
And given how long you've been doing this, obviously you were at the forefront of many of these topics that people talk about today. Having been in that and been aware of it and talking about it and sharing it and giving talks and writing books and being a professor and all the stuff that you do, how are you, like, what has this done to you as an individual, like as a representative of the human race? Have you grown as a man by stepping into this journey? Do you think it's affected your life personally dramatically, and how does that sit with you now
Oh,
as a man?
it's completely transformed my life. Who knows what I would be doing if I wasn't doing this? But if I go back to my days when I went to university, I wasn't at all sure what I was going to do. Maybe I was going to become a lawyer, or maybe I really don't know. But yeah, I think my life is completely different and much better, because I find it immensely rewarding and fulfilling to know that I'm working in accordance with the values that I consider to be right. I think to have harmony between your values and your actions, not perfect harmony. You have to be a saint to have complete harmony, and I'm certainly not a saint, but a reasonable degree of harmony. To identify with a tradition of people through the ages who've tried to do good, tried to make the world a better place. I find that very satisfactory. And I think, going back to what you were talking about anxieties and insecurities and so on, I think looking at that larger cause probably helps with that as well. I know many people whose concerns are much more petty about, renovating their home, or how are they doing compared to their neighbours, or what sort of consumer goods, what sort of wine should they be drinking, this sort of stuff. So I think those sort of concerns just fade away once you really see what is important, what matters in the world.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess overall, then you feel content with your life and your journey and what you've done?
I think I've been extremely fortunate in getting into an area that was significant, an area which not a lot of work had been done at the time that I got into applied or practical ethics. Work had been done going back throughout history, but strangely there'd been a period of Western philosophy, English language philosophy, where people hadn't talked about these issues. They hadn't talked about the ethics of how we ought to treat animals. They hadn't even talked much about the ethics of what are the obligations of comfortably off people in affluent countries to people in extreme poverty elsewhere in the world. So I was able to write some things that got widely read and helped to establish my position, got me professorships at good universities, and that again gave me this larger platform to speak from. And I've found that a fulfilling thing to do. So I'm pretty content with the way my life has gone. I'm not content with the way the world has taken up these ideas as yet, but as I said, I'm somewhat optimistic that we're heading in the right direction.
Does that bother you emotionally at all, like on a feeling level within yourself, that if I compare where you see the world to be and what it could be versus what it is quite divergent. Like obviously you're somewhat ahead of the curve in an overall sense. You take out little specific judgments, which people like to say, oh, you don't do this, Peter, and you don't do that. If I just look overall as a man on this planet, you're far more progressive than most men that I would ever come across, obviously, in your thinking. So within yourself, is that a sense of personal strength that can hold you together, or does that, compared to where the world's at, do you ever lose sleep over it? Is it disturbing? Do you get upset when you see the cruelty and the suffering, or have you just learned to come to terms with it and just deal with it, in a calm way?
Oh, I do get upset. Yeah, I do get upset. I guess I have developed over the years a fairly thick skin through reading about a lot of things, sort of work I had to do in writing animal liberation, to immerse myself in the horrible things that are being done to animals in laboratories and factory farms and so on. I did develop a thicker skin, but I still do get upset by this. And, yes, my life would go better still if I knew that somehow, that this is all going to stop tomorrow. I've also become a realist, as I was saying earlier in our discussion, about the size of the change that's needed and the length of time it's likely to take. And I feel that if I'm contributing to nudging things a little bit further in the right direction, that's something I can be content with.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's a beautiful finish. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, allowing me to cover, many different angles and topics and all that kind of stuff. So I do appreciate your time, Peter, and I admire your work. And I think, I agree. We've all got to put out there what we feel and keep it moving. Otherwise, as a species, no one will know if people like you don't put it out there. So